I want to thank everyone for coming in, and we always thank our sponsors, which is Pro Photo Daily and American Photography, Epson, Photo Shelter, and Archive Magazine. We have two more nights after tonight, where we have two more presenters. We'll have Heathcliff O'Malley and Sasha Maslow. We may have Paula Brochstein, but I'm not sure. She's traveling, and she may be able to come in on Friday, maybe not. But tonight we have a new friend, Michael Brochstein, and I'm thrilled to have him. And Michael, take over the screen, and here we go.
Okay, just to verify, you're all seeing a
Yes.
title slide, Ukrainian War Photojournalist Perspective. Okay.
Yep.
So let me start. Hold on. So basically, I try to give an outline of what I'm going to talk about and organize my pictures to some degree in broad categories. So this is sort of what we're going to do. And this is hopefully where the organization will actually work this way. So probably most people here have now seen 10,000 maps of Kyiv in the news since the war began. I was, my first trip last year, I was in Kyiv and Lviv, which is center and west. And I then, from Kyiv and Lviv, mostly Kyiv, took day trips to places around there like Bucha, Borodyanka, Hostomel, Irpin, etc. And in Lviv, I also, using a fixer who took me to these places, did similarly to see things around there, which are in the categories. So the first,
yeah, Mike, just share with us how you came upon a fixer.
So there was a Facebook group, something called like Media Logistics Support for Ukraine, and it had a few hundred members last year, there's a few thousand this year. You need to be approved by a administrator, and basically it's journalists, fixers, and drivers are basically the three groups of people who seem to be there, either needing or offering services to one another, or looking for someone to share a ride, or from place A to place B or whatever. So it's sort of mutual support and camaraderie, whatever. And through that, I found all my fixers. With one exception, I had some left field connection to somebody who became my fixer, and that's how I found them.
Right.
So and then so anyway, I was in Kyiv and Lviv last year, and this year I started in Kyiv and rented a car with another photojournalist, and we did a circuit, going from Kyiv to Kharkiv, down to Dnipro, to we originally were going to say in Kherson, that didn't work out, into Odessa, and then back up to Sloviansk. And there's a back and forth a few times in there, but that's sort of the circuit, from Kyiv going east, going then to the south, and then back up to Kyiv. But there's a lot more travel back and forth within that. We rented a car for just about 4 weeks. It was a 4-week trip with the car. This time I was in the country for about 31 days.
Wow.
So the photos you're going to see are a combination of last year's and this year's photos. And I've tried to group them into reasonably logical groups on themes, so to say. So the first one is death and destruction, which we've seen a lot of. This is a cemetery in Irpin, where a lot of the victims from Bucha were buried. There was a mass grave found after the Russians were pushed out of Bucha towards the beginning of the war. A number of these graves, you can't tell when they were died. It would show the date of birth for somebody, but it wouldn't show their date of death. It would say approximate, or say a few months, because they don't know when the Russians occupied the area that they actually died, and then they were reburied in this new graveyard. In Kyiv, and this is near where President Biden was seen when he was there, the pictures in front of St. Michael's. There's memorial boards like this on the side of walls, and unfortunately, it's far from the total number of people who were killed in the war. And this is a memorial there. In Kyiv, in Independence Square, just an aside, Maidan Square it's called, but turns out the word Maidan I learned means square. So you're really saying square, but that's another story. At one end of the square, which is quite a large square, there are all these flags, and these flags, it's one per victim, basically, or soldier who died. So it's as a memory. I visited in Dnipro. I visited a hospital treating military, veterans, people who were serving, who were injured. This doctor is showing a CAT scan of a soldier's brain, and you can't see clearly here, but there's little white specks on the brain, and those are pieces of shrapnel in this person's brain. So that was something I hadn't seen before. The toughest room I went into was this room which had members of the military whose limbs were amputated for stepped on mines or whatever the reason was. This is a gentleman's right leg. This is his left leg. It sort of is sobering to walk into a room like this where everybody's got a limb missing. They were in good spirits overall, but it's tough, as you can imagine. This woman was lucky. She stepped on a small mine, probably what's called a butterfly mine, and she had a sneaker on that probably saved her foot. But so in the scheme of things, this wasn't a huge mine, and she was lucky. And there's in Kupiansk, in a different hospital I was in. And these are also cases where fixers helped me get access. Otherwise, I wouldn't know what hospital to go to. I wouldn't know who to talk to. I can't speak the language. A lot of bridges were destroyed, a lot of them on purpose by the Ukrainians to stop the advance of the Russians. And then after they pushed them out, they built roads next to them while they also were rebuilding the bridges. I saw a lot of destroyed buildings. This is probably a former tenant sitting there, as my understanding, in Irpin. So the next bunch of slides I call destruction porn. If you have house porn, you see beautiful houses, you've probably seen or whatever. So the next group of slides is a lot of destroyed buildings. This was one apartment building that the middle was bombed out. So now it's two structures, certainly not habitable. And it is shared off buildings. You could just see the living, the accoutrements of living, the closet with clothing, the kitchen, etc. And unlike the United States, there's no access control, so there's no police line, so you can just walk through them. Of course, how safe it is, I don't know, but I did that anyway.
Michael, let me ask you, for you, who you're covering a lot of stuff in New York and DC, how did you transition to be doing, shooting this kind of, work? And, how did you feel about, you're on a plane now, you're in the middle of this?
Maybe it's my New Yorker background. I figured safety-wise, I'm a small target, large country. The probability of my getting hit, I wasn't embedded with an infantry unit at the very front trading bullets. That would have been dangerous, for sure. And I did wear, not here, but when I was near the front, I was required to wear my ballistic vest and helmet, turn off my phone before I got anywhere near there, and park the vehicles under trees. And at least once we had to hide in the basement because they thought a Russian drone was overhead at the time. And there were things I was not permitted. They said don't photograph because they didn't want it published because it would tell the Russians what vehicle they might be using to control drones, things like that. The interesting piece of this scene is the curved wall in the middle, not a aesthetic choice. This, I assume, is a partially collapsed ceiling or building, and so maybe it wasn't totally risk-free, but I didn't think it was about to collapse anytime soon. Teddy bear sort of reminds you that there was regular life there at one point. I don't know what happened to the people, whether they were in the building and are killed or injured, or they got out in time. I honestly don't know. A lot of people did not go to bomb shelters when they heard. You didn't see anybody running to bomb shelters. I mean, people got used to the air raid sirens that happened. They call them air alerts that happened multiple times during the day, and there are multiple apps on the phone that tell you about alerts and where was hit and all that. So I didn't get to meet people who were actually in these buildings, who lived in these buildings. There's a Grad rocket in front of a destroyed gas station right in the edge of Kyiv. This was a shopping center. This was a monastery. And the Russians were here, and then the Ukrainians pushed them out, and they left a lot of mines. And we'll see more about mines a little later. Lots of mines. You can't just walk off the road. You have to look for them if you want to walk off the road for some reason, you have to make sure there's no sign and it's a safe place when you're out in the country in some places where the Russians had been. Cars didn't escape the bombing. You saw destroyed tanks and other military equipment at various places. It became tourist attractions on some level for people to see destroyed Russian military equipment. This is in front of the same church, St. Michael's. This again is where Biden took. There was pictures of Biden taken when he made a trip there. This was sort of his background. Although these vehicles they were there at the time. People were on the side of roads were looking over the various destroyed tanks. This is a soldier who actually fought right there, right in that battle where this tank was, and then people want to take pictures with him because he's a hero, fighting. On a lot of roads, you see these signs warning you of mines. This is a cemetery which was mined, and nobody can be buried there. Once they put mines there, and so people in the woods dug these temporary graves, which after the Russians were pushed out of this area, they reburied them. So this is what's left of the temporary grave site. Right in the middle of the woods, as you can see all the trees around there. This is one of the more sobering places I went to. I went in Kherson. I went to a couple places where the Russians jailed Ukrainians, tortured them, etc. I'm not showing any picture of the rooms where they were tortured. There was some blood on the wall still, but they were so dark I really couldn't get a good photo, so I'm not really showing. But there was one basement where these jail cells were, no windows, damp, dark, cold, and this is not on a cold day. You can just imagine how bad it would be to be locked in one of these things. Even the this is an old jail cell that the Ukrainians stopped using, but then the Russians decided this was a good place to put their prisoners. 1 second.
And how was the transition for you to be shooting this? I mean, this is so different from what you've been doing. From an emotional standpoint, how was this?
I didn't have an emotional reaction, but I mean, before I became a photojournalist and shoot mostly politicians and protests, I personally like to do landscapes and scenery and scenes. So on some level, it was going back to composing photos and not just getting a picture of politician X talking at a lectern kind of photos.
Right.
I liked the change of pace. Not that I liked war. I liked the adventure of it, but I never thought I was in danger. So it wasn't adventure. Oh, I get killed any second. It was just a change of pace, like going on vacation, a change of pace. I know it sounds terrible, like I'm a war tourist, but I actually thought of this as a positive adventure. It was not an easy trip physically and logistically, but I was happy to be doing this kind of work. So I never really had I didn't have any emotional problems with it. I didn't see any dead human bodies in my trip. I never was at a scene that was recent enough that could revolt me, kind of thing, so
Yeah.
that answers your question.
Yeah, no, it does.
This is resilience and rebuilding, signs of resilience and rebuilding. All the monuments were sandbagged. There were posters on walls that were sort of patriotic. This was last year. They have new posters this year, but I did not find a good place to take the photos of them. They took down most street signs in most places and most traffic signs, which means you needed Google Maps or a printed map in a lot of places. For some reason, this building, they never took the street sign down from. And then a lot of patriotic signs, like the store window. The store was closed, but they put in this patriotic sign, bravery made in Ukraine. You may think this is a person who just simply painted flowers, but actually they decided to take bullet holes and make art out of it and paint flowers around all the bullet holes. The Russians were in this town at the beginning of the war before they were pushed out. Mm-hmm. A unique lawn ornament I saw in the Donbass, in the Donetsk Oblast, a doll with a toy assault rifle, but she's sitting on a real tail section of a rocket. You can see the tail, the fins that pop out when it comes out of the tube. that have popped out, and it's just a very rare part of it. A refugee center, and it wasn't all bad. You were in some cities like Odessa, particularly in parts of Kiev. You wouldn't know there was a war going on because it was springtime. And unlike last year, where these places were empty, especially Kiev, this year you wouldn't know in some places there's a war going on. On the other hand, if you go down the wrong block, you see a destroyed building, you get reminded. On the other hand, in the Donbass, you had these totally destroyed villages and areas where there's nothing that's not negatively affected in a terrible, terrible way. There's, just like in Times Square where you have these people dressed up trying to pose with people for tips, there was a minion doing the same thing in Maidan Independence Square. This is a sunflower field which was not harvested, possibly because it was mined towards in the Donbass in Kiev Sharivka, whereas in other parts they were able to plant and carry on, farming as they'd done in the past. Back in Kiev, they had put in these concrete, they couldn't dig down and dig trenches to defend Kiev. They thought Kiev was going to be overrun by Russians. So they created these prefab sort of bunkers above ground for soldiers to hide in and to fight against Russians. Fortunately, they never made it this far. It's totally coincidence. I got a picture of a car driving by with a press sticker on it. It truly was coincidental. I didn't realize it until I'd seen it after I took the picture. This is now back towards the front, where I had to take an up-armored civilian van with people dressed, people dressed, in ballistic vests and helmets to deliver food packages to people right near the front in villages that you couldn't get to. They were in somewhat closed military zones, but a number of people decided not to leave. So World Central Kitchen prepared the food, and these vehicles with special police that do this kind of work, fully closed for protection, and in up armored vehicles deliver. This is another village, and it's mostly old people who were still living there. In the basement of one of these villages, there was a bomb shelter in the bottom of a firehouse, and you could see where people sleep when they think they're endangered. It was not luxury accommodations, although this makes it look even nicer than it was. In a different village in the basement, in a basement of a school, that was a firehouse before the basement, people had makeshift kitchens. And some of the foodstuffs that were delivered by these armored vans delivered basic food that then were cooked. In this, I believe, this town, that's where we had to hide in the basement while they thought Russian drones were above. They didn't want to see too many people around, or the Russians might start targeting this place again. And the school was semi-destroyed already.
And Michael, at this point, you're with a fixer and any other photographers, or just you and the fixer?
I'm with in these forward villages. In almost all the pictures, except in Kiev itself, I'm with a fixer because they know where to take you. They've been there. They know where the destroyed buildings are. They know where, who. Because I didn't bring an up armored vehicle. I rented a Toyota Corolla, but the fixers, they typically had SUVs, but the press officers that they connected us to units that had armored vehicles, either up armored civilian vehicles, or later on we'll see an armored personnel carrier that they put us in because we were too close to the front for anything less than that, they thought. So it's a fixer that knew this farm that I'm now showing you. And it's a big farm, and there's a lot of farms there. Agriculture is physically a large part of Ukraine farming. And this is part of what's left of a roof we're building. There were many vehicles destroyed by the Russians. These are some. A couple of pigs jumped into a well, never got out again. This is the only dead living organisms you're going to see in this presentation. But fortunately, they were able to afford to demine some fields in this farm, and the new tractors and farm vehicles were either donated or loaned by NGOs so that they could start farming again.
And Michael, did anyone have to edit your images, for security reasons? Or...
No, but in some cases, we were told, don't photograph this. Or in one case, it was don't publish this for at least a day, because there was a mobile unit, and they knew they'd be somewhere else. So even if hypothetically, or a number of cases they said is make sure the photograph doesn't show something that would they'd be able to geolocate. So if I'm in a forest, we'll see a picture later of a tank, it could be a generic forest, but they didn't want something that was beyond the forest I could have photographed if I reframed the photo to show what might be a building or some structure that then they could geolocate and then bomb. I can't hear it. I'm sorry.
No, that was someone's speaker on. You're good.
Yeah. This is a bridge being rebuilt. We did see, especially this is north of Kyiv on the way we were going. I went to Chernobyl, which I'm not showing in this because it's just more. It's not. It's sort of like it was an aside I did, but there aren't too many actual war-related things I saw in Chernobyl. So Chernobyl's not in this presentation. But I passed a few bridges that were being rebuilt at that point. These are ones the Ukrainians destroyed and now rebuilding. There's a lot of down electrical lines. At one point, we randomly just passed a crew repairing them, and the fixer talked to them, and they let us photograph them. So we did that for a while to give you an idea to put it high up.
Are you working for a newspaper or a magazine at this time, or you're doing this on your own and then trying to send them over the wire?
I sent everything over wires to the wires with the wire services I work with every day or every few days. The schedule was such that unless I didn't want to sleep, I might shoot for 1, 2, or 3 days, and only after the 1, 2, or 3 days edit and file. None of this was timely news, of something that happened that day that there was a story going to be written. Because usually if you need a story for then to be a demand for a photograph, and all of these were almost evergreens, subject evergreens.
Right.
Repair of electrical down lines, this can be published anytime kind of thing. So now we're going to see some what I'll call humanitarian volunteer efforts. Again, a combination of last year and this year's trips. So in Lviv, in a library, women were making camouflage nets, and I saw these nets used, at the front. They had all these different colored strips of cloth, which they picked from randomly, I guess, and they tied these knots in these large, nets to these large nets that then got shipped to the front and used. They were making large flags in a different part of the same library. It's a fairly patriotic country. Would be my observation. And I don't think just because of war. And this woman's making large flags, but because of the war, not generically. We'd be making these flags. There was a high-end T-shirt shops in Lviv and other places which they sold for profit, and they made a particular set of T-shirts that they sold, and the profit went to support the Air Force. So this guy is silk screening those particular T-shirts. I went to a couple logistical hubs, they call them, we call them warehouses, where donations came in from all over Europe and the world and then get redistributed as needed. Here they're unloading one, they're moving, a pallet of, not a pallet, but a bunch of boxes to some part of the warehouse. I went a couple. This is a place they didn't want me to take outdoor photos because they didn't want the Russians to see where the warehouses were, as an example. This woman, they're making first aid kits to then be distributed as appropriate in the front or wherever. Notice over her right shoulder towards the left of the photo, there's an EU flag. So just get a sense of where they're from. I saw things written on these boxes from quite large number of countries. World Central Kitchen, I went to a couple of them in the Lviv area. They prepare meals used all over. We saw earlier in the Frontline Village World Central Kitchen bags being distributed with food. This is one of the couple kitchens I saw which they were preparing meals. And mostly volunteers, those are the ones probably in the black T-shirts. There was a professional chef, but there's usually a few professionals, and they are directing, or they're the experts, so to say. Obviously, the guy on the right in the white chef's outfit is the professional. I then in Kyiv went to an auto body shop, which painted per day 14, 15 vehicles green or camouflage to then get distributed to the military to use. There were many civilian vehicles I saw that had been painted green used at the front, as well as a lot of the Ukrainian military members of the military use their own vehicles just for practical reasons. There's a lot more improvisation and easygoingness for some things, whereas in the U.S. Army, to be more standardization, and you couldn't use your personal vehicle. So these volunteers are putting covering up the windows so that they don't get spray painted. It's not pretty, the spray paint. They paint everything. They also repair the vehicles. There they're painting. Here's a vehicle. Notice the plates. The last vehicle we saw, I didn't say, it was British plates, but I saw plenty of others. These are two teenagers in Borodyanka, which had a lot of destruction, raising money for the military. So now
yeah, can you speak to this volunteerism? What it feels like to be around all these people. Like your fixer brings you there, and all you see are these volunteers who are, like those women doing the camouflage nets. I mean, that's a tedious, boring thing to do, and they're all in. I mean, did you have any communication with them other than photographing them?
Not with particularly those women you're speaking of, but my impression is speaking to various people as well as fixers, and because I don't speak Ukrainian, some speak English, some don't. The women doing the nets didn't speak English, for instance. There's unity of purpose, and maybe I didn't meet the people who were not with the program, but I had the impression that there's a very large percentage of the population is, we have to fight this war, we have to push the Russians off all of our territory, and there is no second choice. That is a job. There is there's no alternative. So I think they're all in it. They're not happy to be in it, but they see it as, there's no choice. We're going to do this. So there wasn't a morale issue on that level, although nobody wants to get killed or injured, obviously. So I did one day photograph the daily briefing by the department, the spokesperson for the Ukraine Ministry of Defense. That was the closest I came to photographing a talking head in this, like a politician, although he's not a politician, but you get the idea. This is in Kyiv, actually. Lots and lots of recruitment billboards for military, some police. I only photographed a couple in Kupiansk, but they're all over the place. And this is in Hostomel. A number of military don't want their face photographed, so they cover it up when there's a journalist around. So here we have one guy who's covered it up, the other guy didn't. It's not a cold day. It's not because of the weather. He's covering his face. But there's good morale. You see, I happen to bump into these three guys from a local territorial defense force for a local neighborhood in Kyiv, and they were happy guys. I mean, and they don't want to be doing the job. I think this is volunteer work. I don't think they're being paid, but there's no question, they're going to do this job. They're defending themselves, their friends, their neighbors. So you have that sense of positive energy. A couple of guys, just after they were doing target practice, they were coming back from looking at the targets here. Well, they did. What I find, I have other photos probably better at this, but you notice their uniforms. There's almost nothing that's the same on their uniforms between these two guys. So some units, they probably just got issued uniforms. They all wear the same, but lots and lots of people go into military stores, which civilians could go into too, and they'll get what they think are higher performing pieces of clothing or pouches or vests or whatever, not weapons, so to say, other than knives. And so it's not uniform like the American military. They're all very uniform in how they're attired. Just to give you a sense, one of the soldier wore this bracelet that says "God is with us" in Ukrainian. I don't know how religious he was, but I think that it gives a sense of the unity of purpose. These are civilians last year who were training because they figured they might have to defend the area or they're going to go into the military. And except for the guy on the right, none of them had military actual service experience. They changed the law when the war began so civilians could buy military weapons because they expected that they might be defending their homes, literally. They expected the Russians to be right where these people were in Kyiv at one point, but fortunately they repelled them. Notice the difference in weapons and et cetera, in weapons.
That's an interesting photograph as the soldier is looking at these three guys.
He's the instructor here.
Yeah. I mean, can you pick three guys who show? I mean, at least two of those guys have no idea what they're doing, right? Those two guys on the left. I mean, that's not even good form for a carnival shooting rubber ducks. I mean, my God.
So at this point, he ran them through drills of quickly changing cartridges of bullets, then obviously holding the weapon appropriately and then target back. So the guy on the left is practicing quickly removing the cartridge that holds bullets and putting in a new cartridge. And they did a bunch of drills with that. They did target practice and plenty of other things like that. But you can see just a variety of weapons because these are all their personal weapons.
Mm.
They did target practice. They adjusted the sights on a weapon. Notice the headphones for hearing protection the guy on the right has there. They practiced, and they were shown, how do you approach a vehicle? Where do you take cover in the vehicle? How do you fire from behind the vehicle? What's the proper form? He didn't shoot me. This was, he knew I was there. This is called a stack. You've seen this in movies where police and military move in a line. They practice stacks. They practice approaching a vehicle, a building, and sort of storming a building. Now we're towards the front. We're near Kherson. A number of these slides, you say, says the exact location not disclosed. They didn't want us to be able to publish exactly where these things were taking place so that the Russians wouldn't know. These guys, this unit was the military unit was collecting unexploded ordnance, and they were eventually going to, destroy the ordnances. We'll see. In the front are rockets. There's howitzer shells near where his long leg is standing in the back. This is a fuse from a 152 millimeter howitzer shell. They took them obviously off. They unscrewed them from all the howitzer shells so they wouldn't explode unexpectedly. They then put these shells into a pit, and the yellow brick sort of he's holding, and the little thin thing is a detonator. This is how they're going to blow it up. This is them blowing up that pit with a few shells in it. This is the forest I was talking about. I had to frame my shots so that beyond the trees, you wouldn't be able to see a landmark. So now it's just a generic, there's a captured Russian tank in a forest. And therefore, I wouldn't be betraying the location. They showed us all different fixtures and contacts, showed us an abandoned Russian campsite where the Russians were until the Ukrainians pushed them out. As you can see, they try to hide. They built little dugouts, if you want to call them bunkers, to hide. So right from going from above, you wouldn't be able to tell that there's anything going on here because it's all vegetation on top. But obviously, you could see where they would enter this. Now we're at a different place. This is Yuri, the commander of a self-propelled 152 millimeter howitzer, hidden in a forest. He's sort of telling us what's going to happen, admittedly not in English, so it didn't help me too much. You can see the camouflage net on the howitzer. This is like a tank with a big gun. As you see, it's in a forest with netting, and it's just the edge of a forest, so it wouldn't easily be seen. This is inside, a couple guys inside. This is an empty shell. One of them is carrying after it's been fired. They offered me to take one back to the States as a souvenir, but it wasn't very practical, so I didn't take it. Now we're at a different location, unmarked building. They had kittens for some reason. Cat gave birth, so they were taking care of kittens. This is with a mortar unit. And this is in a sub-basement, the commander of the mortar unit briefing us. Notice, I don't know if you can see it, on his left breast pocket area that says 5.11. 5.11 is an American company that makes military and police uniforms and accessories. So you can see there's another example of he bought probably a better quality jacket from that 5.11 brand. And a lot of towns have stores selling all types of military garb, as opposed to whatever was issued by the Ukrainian military. We were near Bakhmut. They didn't think it was safe for us to drive to where the actual mortar was. Mortars only have a couple mile range, so we were probably within a mile of the Russians. A couple times I was within a mile of the Russians, but this time the mortars only go a couple miles. So they put us in one of these to travel. It's actually a smooth ride, better than in a car on some of these roads. It's a tracked vehicle. This guy's standing on a chair so that he can see above the turret. He's the gunner. The commander looking at a small slit. This is the actual mortar, this little thing, this little tube, which was fired, and we're at the edge of the woods. And as soon as he fires it, he covers it with a green cloth so it can't be easily spotted. Then they they walk away through the forest, and they'll later come out and shoot again when they realize where exactly they want to shoot. This is our press liaison for a drone unit. What's interesting, as an aside, he's on his vest. I don't know if you can see it. It says A It has like two lines and then a plus. So it turns out the Warsaw Pact used a different method of delineating blood types. They use Roman numerals, 1 for O, 2 for A. So now there's a lot of patches. Journalists and people who work at the front military has patches with the blood type. So he has one that shows both, which is pretty common. I eventually picked up one too. This is inside an up-armored vehicle. I blacked out the screens. It shows his view of what the drone sees. It's a reconnaissance drone. He's running. We were told don't photograph the outside of the van. It's a very generic looking civilian van, but as you can see, the inside is up armored, so it was bulletproof. This is a Ukrainian made drone. I believe it's Valkyrie, although they spell it a little differently. If you could read my caption, we're less than 6 kilometers from the zero line, which is what they call the front, and it's launched via slingshot. And it's a reconnaissance drone to see, the Russians and to direct units that fire at the Russians what to do, etc. I got to.
And what is the morale of the soldiers? Do they have a sense of how they're progressing? Like, those guys that you were with, they were winning. This was a good week, a bad week. Did you get any sense of that?
So when I was Kherson, I was there the week before the dam was blown up. They flooded Kherson in the south.
Yeah.
But Kherson was a lot of it was like a ghost town, pretty bad looking. But I had the impression, and it was before the major part of the counteroffensive began. I left Ukraine like a week or two before the counteroffensive really took off. So at that point, it was more static, although it was lots of fighting around Bakhmut and some other areas. And Kherson, I couldn't go anywhere near the river. I had the impression that morale was as good as you would expect. That's the impression. I wasn't with a unit that was in the middle of a fight, but I met people who had been in the middle of battles. I won't name names, but there was one guy we met that another person I traveled with says, this guy must have PTSD the way he talks, but I didn't spot that. So I can't say that. I did learn some acronyms. If you could read the 40 millimeter UBGL, that means underbarrel grenade launcher. So I've learned a little military nomenclature because I don't have any military background personally. So you saw these boxes all over the place because they've used a lot of ammunition, in this war. I wanted, of course, to photograph Zelensky there. I never did it, but it was in Washington, D.C. I did get the photograph with Biden once at the White House. And that's it. And the first word I tried to learn was thank you, which is diakuyu. So thank you very much for watching my presentation.
No, that's very nice, Mike. So, do you have any plans on going back? What are your plans?
After my first trip last year, I definitely wanted to go back and get closer to the front and photograph lots of things I didn't do before. I went back. It was a 5-week trip this past May, June area time frame, and I did. So right now to go back, I'm open to doing it, but it's not free. I mean, going back is you're paying not just for the airfare. Hotels are inexpensive. You're paying for fixers, which is like an expensive hotel per day. So, if somebody fronts the money or puts me on assignment, I might, but I'm not sure I'm ready to spend the money to go back anytime soon. The winters are pretty rough there. May is a wonderful month for weather. I've been there 2 Mays now. So, we're going into winter. So I'm not sure on my own volition I'm going back in the next few months. Right. Who knows about next year?
And do you feel after you do work like this, Mike, it changes you in any way? Like seeing this and then coming back to the States and, the transition, do you go through anything yourself in that vein?
I don't think I was emotionally thrown by this. I wasn't in places to see human dead bodies or parts. I mean, the most sobering thing I saw, besides obviously destruction, was the ward with soldiers with amputated limbs. That's sobering, to put it mildly. Yeah. I don't think I had a transition issue emotionally on this. I mean, but when you come back, you've seen this, you now have, it's one thing to read about something, it's another one thing to see it firsthand. And the pictures you see here don't show all of Ukraine, they show things relative to the war, destroyed things, people, dead people, injured people, trains transporting people. This brings up another point. A lot of things I might have wanted to photograph, it would have looked funny for me to pick up a camera and take a photo of. They'd say, "Who are you? What are you doing here? You know, are you not a spy?" They were worried about those things. So I didn't have a much. I mean, it was a change of pace for sure, but I don't think emotionally I had a major problem with transitioning.
Right. And would your loved ones say the same thing when you came home?
I didn't. Both last time and this time, I did not tell any friends that I went or relatives. I told a few photographers because they're the ones who'd say, "Oh, I wish I was going too," kind of thing. You know, the photojournalists. I only told them when I was back in Warsaw on the way back. Only one friend figured out I was there because they hadn't heard from me in a while. And if no offense, I like Verizon, but they say their phones work in Ukraine and Poland, but they really don't so well. So I really couldn't be in touch with people and show an American phone number or texting from an American. So one friend figured out I must be back in Ukraine in 5 weeks. So I did okay for them.
Okay.
I don't want to worry them. My photojournalistic friends, great. Good luck.
Yeah. It's two different worlds, right? The photojournalists are come at it from a different angle. And if anyone else has any questions, raise your hand or just speak up. Jay can unmute everybody. But that's it's interesting getting your perspective, as a reporter on. So did you ever think that it would have been good to be with a writer as well?
It would be good because writers like fixers have contacts, so they get contacts. And we did talk to people, and I did travel obviously with somebody who spoke fluently Ukrainian and Russian, but it's not the same thing as somebody who's got a full story. On the other hand, we were looking to take photos. I've traveled with reporters, and what the reporter generally needs to do, maybe to see things, but mostly to talk to people, but that doesn't make great photos. So the trip was, the people I traveled with, I wasn't the only, I mean, there were times there were the other people, they were mostly wanted photos or occasionally video. So we had a different goal, and therefore we try to optimize for that. But certainly I would love to travel with a reporter, but I never had the opportunity.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Okay. So, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming in and sharing with us, and in a very logistical way, and with all of your themes. I think that presentation is very, very organized. It's very nice.
Thank you.
Easy for all of us to get. So of course you're invited to come back in any way. Oh, so we have a question. Let's see. Stella. Jay, unmute Stella or unmute everybody and see what question Stella has.
I think it's Sally.
Was it Sally? I have to take my glasses off.
You know that person.
Yeah, Sally. Sally.
While Sally's unmuting, hey, Michael, thanks for doing this. It's great work, and really admirable that you went to Ukraine and took the time. When you were there, where did you stay? Like, how did you? And I missed the very beginning, so you may have spoke about that. But where were you staying during the time you were there?
The first time I went, I spoke to other photojournalists who went there. Where did you stay? What hotels you recommend? I really didn't know what was there and reliable. In the end, I stayed in one hotel that was recommended. It was perfectly nice. But most of the hotels I found through TripAdvisor or Kayak or any of these sites, read reviews, because most of them are functioning normally. Although I spent 10 nights over 2 different trips at Sloviansk, which is not exactly in the TripAdvisor. And I stayed in a hotel I never would have found. It was the only functioning hotel in town. It was fine, but two of the fixers I dealt with each knew of this hotel, and that's why I ended up staying there. But all the rest of the hotels in Kyiv, Dnipro, Odessa, I'm trying to remember what are the towns. Kharkiv, I found through TripAdvisor and other typical websites one might consult to find hotels and read reviews of.
Okay, I'm unmuted.
There you go, Sally.
Hi, Michael. Nice to see you.
Nice
Yeah,
to see you too.
I live in Chicago now, so I haven't seen you in a long time. This is really great work, and I want to know if you have plans to share it more widely. Like other groups or an
I've
exhibit?
given presentations with several small groups, and I'm open to giving presentations to other groups.
Okay,
You know, I
You-
haven't
you have a-
proactively contacted
right.
places so
Do
much.
you have a, do you have a website?
Yeah, you'll splitstonemedia.com.
I'm sorry?
Splitstonemedia.com.
Splitstone. Okay,
It
got
doesn't
it.
have all the photos. It's really just my photojournalistic site. I'm
Okay.
open to doing if somebody wants to invite me, etc. Not expecting
Well,
to get invited.
I'd just like to see the work, exhibited more widely. I know some
But
people
all the
who are,
photos you saw and many others, these are just a few of the photos, have been distributed through multiple wire services. So they've been all been published,
oh,
not all, but a lot of them been published and are continuing to be published. Some shots are generic, like the tank in the woods was
mhm,
published. Some European place used it last week because it's just and the explosion of the shells from the demining unit about 2-3 weeks ago. Somebody used it. I guess it's just a generic of a certain subject matter.
got it. So if we Google your name, will that come up?
Photos with my names on it. Finding the Ukrainian ones might be the needle in the haystack.
Okay, got it. Well, it's really wonderful to see your work, and I know people who've been involved in this cause, from the beginning and help bring families over. So to see what's going on back in their homeland is
I will say that
very moving.
I was very much drawn to visit Ukraine. I have a very strong personal feelings
All right,
about the war, as probably most people do. And
right.
it was sort of magnetic to me. I want to go there and
It's
document it and see this.
a lot of our grandparents came from there, and it's
I
really
have
sad.
one from Mariupol. So, I mean, although that was not a
Oh,
factor in my going, I found out after the first trip.
it's funny because when I was growing up, I always thought my grandfather came from Odessa, and that's why we like the beach. But he really was from very far inland, and
It's a beautiful
just
city, and it's still beautiful.
still beautiful. Good. Well, glad to hear. Hopefully we can all go sometime.
Yeah, and
All right.
Michael, what is the
Keep up the good work. What's what?
Michael, what is the magnetic pull for you?
It's a
Oh,
well, it's a magnet. Good. It's a fair question. It's a compelling story. It's a big bully country trying to take over, a small country. It's a place in the world which I'm familiar with compared to some more obscure parts of the world. And unlike other wars, if you were to travel to Afghanistan or Iraq or some other places, just walking the streets, I could be a target, a victim of
mhm.
bad play. Whereas in Ukraine, they want journalists to cover the war. They want the world to see and hear what's going on there. They like Americans.
Right.
I never felt at all in any place unsafe. And vis-a-vis safety in general, it's a big country and I'm a small target, as I was speaking to Frank before. So I never felt that that a bomb could hit me. And I wasn't embedded with an infantry unit at the very front where bullets were flying. That's not what I did. So that short
Yeah.
of that, I
Well,
thought it'd be a chance anything could happen to me.
I'm amazed there were hotels. When you think about going to a war zone, you hardly think that there are going to be hotels to stay
Well, think
at.
about it. Big country,
Right.
Texas. Some parts towards the front are devastated villages and other
Right.
things, places. But a lot of the country, it's a big country. They couldn't bomb everything. Kyiv has 2.5 to 3 million people. There's a few buildings that have been destroyed, but they'd have to have destroyed 10,000, 100,000 buildings. I don't know how many buildings are there, but there's millions
Right.
of people living there.
Right. That was what you brought home to us.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yep. Any other questions? Any other comments? All right. So again, Michael, I thank you very much for presenting, and you always have a place to come back to if you go back or you have other insight you want to share with us. You just have to let me know, and we would we'd love to have you back. And what I'd like to do is you have the last word for the night, so you can send us off.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm admittedly was and am intimidated because your other presenters on Ukraine are some of the top photographers in the country or maybe the world on this subject. So I hope I didn't embarrass projections by my probably less than Pulitzer Prize winning material.
No, that's that was the worst ending statement of anyone so
Do it again.
far. Say.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, you
How's
did
that for a last statement?
yeah, you enlightened us, and that's the whole idea. So again, I thank you. Anytime, like I say, you'd like to come back, we would welcome it in a second. So thank you. Like I said, tomorrow night we have Sasha Maslov, and on Friday we're going to have Heathcliff O'Malley, maybe Paula Bronstein. We'll see. But I appreciate everyone coming in. And if you haven't, please sign up. Please subscribe to our YouTube page. That would be a big help. Projections NYC. I would appreciate that very much. And we will see everyone tomorrow or Friday night. So I thank you very, very much.